You're all waiting for the Paratype panel. We can give a few minutes for the last few folks to settle in, and also to make sure the screen recording is working before we start. And let me actually share my screen so y'all can actually see my presentation. Great. Seems like people can see it. Wonderful. All right, then I will. Oh, great. Are we starting the recording or not yet? Because I'm gonna wait for that. Okay, recording is happening, so I will just start the panel and let's all get going. So, hello everyone. Happy OtherCon, and today I am presenting on paratypes, because it's a term I think is important and that a lot of people could benefit from, and maybe not everyone who could use it already knows about it. So that's my job. So, my agenda for today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the origin of the term, the current definition, give some examples, mostly drawing from my own life because I'm the person I can talk about the best. I'm going to go over when or in what situations you might consider paratype being the appropriate term, questions you might ask yourself. And then this presentation is pretty short, so we will hopefully have a lot of time for questions and answers and Q&A and discussion afterward. So, without further ado, let us begin. So, Poppy/Ben in the chat is really the origin of this term, and they originally coined the term cameo types, saying, you know those characters, animals, and so on that make you feel all shifty, but aren't technically kit types or hearted types, yet are still important enough to your Therian/kin experience that you feel like mentioning them somehow? I propose we call them cameo types. Likely off of cameo shift, or like a cameo in a movie, when something sort of shows up and is important, but isn't really a main character. This term would cover things that push into a shift for an established kin type, things you often cameo shift into, and things that feel like heart types but only do so because they remind you of your kin type. And take a note of that last sentence, that there's, from the beginning, this association with an existing kin type. It's something that reminds you of a type you already have. So that was sort of the early prototype form of what would eventually become paratype, and it got discussed in the community, and people had it back and forth. Some more quotes from Poppy include, the term also includes things that are thematically similar to your kin type, things that only feel like kin types the moment you're exposed to them, and more. And the Otherkin dictionary the person behind the Otherkin dictionary ended up contributing, at least for me, these creatures feel almost like a greater family group in the sense that I'm not them, but they embody something similar enough that they evoke some kind of kin feeling in me without actually being a kin type. So based on these quotes and some others, you can sort of get the idea that, like, the thing we're looking at is similarity, whether thematic or physical or familial. Like, there's something related or adjacent enough that it's activating some kin-related feelings. So the current definition in the Alterhuman dictionary is paratype, a character, animal, or mythical creature that is not a kin/therio/ficto type or a heart type, but somehow feels important to your established identity. Some examples of how it may manifest include inducing shifts of one or more of your established types, showing up as a cameo shift that somehow feels related, or feeling similar to a heart type because they remind you of your kin type in some significant way. So again, we're having this, like, it causes shifts of an established type, it feels related to an established type, it's similar, it reminds you of it somehow. In short, I would say think of relatives. A paratype is not an independent identity, it is somehow related to an existing kin or heart type. And basically anything can have a relationship to an existing type. So sometimes it's just pure physical or biological similarity. So I, for example, am a border collie. and that's a specific kind of dog, but other dogs and coyotes and all sorts of things can activate similar feelings because they're like 99% the same. Like if I, see an Australian Shepherd running around, that's going to activate some of my dog shifts just because it's very similar in shape and motion and similar things. It doesn't have to be a biological relationship. If you're a bird and you fly around a lot, maybe seeing a video of a bat flying around also activates some of a shift or something, even though birds and bats are not closely biologically related. For fiction kin or archetypes, that might be that, like, hey, this other character went through a really similar story or fits the same archetype, so they're activating some similar feelings. Also, it doesn't have to be a very direct relationship. Any sort of kin or stereotype or heart type probably has something in its life cycle or its history that relates to other beings. For example, one of my strongest paratypes as a border collie is sheep, because it's a herding dog, and I want to herd sheep. Sheep activate a lot of dog shifts for me. If you are a wolf, seeing deer running might activate some memories for you because deer are probably important to wolves. This goes very strongly for any fictotypes, because a given character is likely to have important, significant relationships, whether that's romantic partners, best friends, enemies, family relationships. It makes sense if you are a particular person to have feelings about other people that person has connections with. There's other, potential natural connections depending on species. Monarch butterflies are dependent on milkweed as a plant. Maybe that stirs some emotions or, activates some shifty feelings if you're a butterfly. Also, this is all happening inside people's own heads, so sometimes these relationships seem obvious on the surface, but also maybe you just have a personal association that other people wouldn't, or that isn't universal just because of your own background and history and how you think about things. Maybe other people don't associate Superman with squids, but for whatever reason you do, and seeing squids makes you think of Superman. It can be very personal. So this is a chart I made some years ago when trying to figure out my kin identities and paratypes, where the two identities that I actually hold, where I would say I am a dog and I am a fawn, dog and fawn, these are my kin types. These are what I am. All the little planets you see surrounding the suns are essentially paratypes. So around the dog sphere, you have the other dogs, basically any other dog. But I would like to specifically highlight Rockruff. I don't know why, but for some reason, Rockruff from Pokemon just really activates dog shifts for me. I don't know why. More so than any other dog. And also a lot of, like, fae and fairy related dogs, like Kushi and Kunanan, especially because they're associated with having red and white fur, which is like a Noimata for my dog type, activate a lot of the same dog feels. Sheep are a paratype of both of my identities, both because I associate sheep with goats and because as a herding dog, I like herding sheep. So sheep just double whammy paratype. On the fawn side, perhaps unsurprisingly, goats, both anthro and regular, because if you have goat legs and goat horns and goat hooves, goats are going to feel pretty similar, as are other ungulates. Deer and rams and things always activate horn and hoof shifts for me, unavoidable. Centaurs activate a lot of the same feelings as like a half-human, half-animal sort of species, especially again with the hoof aspect. And this is why I had personal connections as one of the ways that things can be related, because most people looking at a fawn, especially a fawn from Greek mythology or something like that, or Roman mythology, would not think, oh yeah, grass Pokemon. But for me personally, my fawn identity is associated with, like, springtime and nature spirit aspects, and the idea of, like, plant and animal features mixed, so the idea of, like, having grass for fur and concepts like that. So for me, depictions of, like, grass Pokemon or plant animal monsters or fairies or mythical creatures that incorporate plant and animal body parts are activating of my, like, fawnkin type. So that's a paratype for me, even though it maybe wouldn't be for some other fawn somewhere. One of the ways I think a lot of paratypes show up is actually in archetypes. And so for those of you that weren't at OtherCon a few years ago, or at the Centaurus Festival where I gave my talk on archetypes, archetypal identity is basically identifying with an archetype or a trope. That could be the prince, the supervillain, the, green magical girl. And because archetypes by default are a character category that multiple characters will fit, they are ripe for activating a lot of feelings either because there's a related trope or a character that fits that trope. So for me personally, I identify as a paladin. So things like clerics from D&D, very similar, lots of overlapping abilities and feelings and vibes. Also princes in a lot of fairy tales, there's a lot of overlap. Knights go on quests and become princes. Princes go on adventures. There's a vibe. For me personally, magical girls are a paladin paratype. Like, I've seen people argue that, like, oh, magical girls are, in D&D terms sorcerers because they, like, make a pact, or it's science-based, or, like, in my experience, it doesn't super matter what the origin of the power is. You have a magical warrior that operates on the power of friendship and believing real hard in things, and that smells like a paladin to me. And as a secondary offshoot off of that, for me, there's a link to, like, transforming heroes and heroes with, like, a transformation sequence, even though if you read, like, the D&D description of a paladin, that's not part of them. That's just a chain reaction of dominoes in my brain. I'm a right-hand man archetype as well, so that activates, like, the Lancer trope for me is usually really resonant. The other characters depicted here are, like, Pearl from Steven Universe, Carrot from Cucumber Quest, Gawain from the Arthurian mythos, Despero from The Tale of Despero, all of whom I think are paladin characters. You're welcome to disagree with me, but when I watch these or read these, like, it really activates those kin feelings for me. So there is also, because these are all about relationships, it is possible to have second or third degree relationships, because A activates feelings for B, which activates feelings for C. So for example, I have a fawn kin type. That is the base identity. I identify as a fawn, period. Because of that, one paratype I have from fawns, as you may have seen on the earlier chart, is fairies, because there's a lot of similar nature spirit aspects, wilderness aspects, magical association aspects. So a lot of fairy stories will activate fawn feelings for me. A lot of fairy stories also involve small, tiny characters and pixies and, fairies that use flowers as clothing and have, little miniature lives, which to me relates to what TV Tropes calls mouse worlds, which are, any setting in fiction where, like, characters are particularly small but living in a larger human world. So mice characters, borrowers, fairy characters, there's a lot of them. Nobody, without knowing the specific convolutions of my brain, would go, oh, you're a fawn? That must mean you relate to mouse worlds. These two things are not strongly related for most other people, but it's sort of a paratype of a paratype, and ends up feeling like a heart home for me. So when might you consider, is this a paratype or not? Like, should I consider some of these paratypes? I will never tell people that their particular list of kin types is right or wrong. That's entirely up to them to determine. But it might be something worth questioning if you find yourself feeling drawn to, like, a lot of closely related kin types. If you're having trouble determining, like, okay, I kind of feel like a husky, but also kind of like a German shepherd, also kind of like a Malinois, and also kind of like a wolf, like, those species and breeds are like 99% similar. It is possible that you have one kin type and the others are just so close that they're naturally going to activate some similar feelings. Similarly, if there's a recurring theme or similarity, if you find yourself being, drawn to or having shifts from or feeling associated with, like, every single white-haired anime boy, maybe some of those are paratypes. Again, the origin of paratype was originally called cameo type and about cameo shifts. And people mostly talk about shifts only being activated by stereotypes or kin types, and that's just not true. Paratypes can activate shifts, heart types can activate shifts. Inducing shifts is a pretty common feature of paratypes. Again, they're just similar enough that your brain is going to ping on those reactions. And again, personal associations, even if you can't think of a reason in reality or logic that, like, you know, why would this character make me think of grasshoppers? If there's some personal history there or an association for you, it's possible that they're linked in your brain. So if I were questioning a paratype, I would sort of ask myself, does this identity stand on its own? Is it something that's sort of independent and that I would feel regardless of everything else? Or would I not feel as strongly about this if I wasn't already? Why? Like, that was one of the things with my sheep paratype. It was like, okay, I have these really strong feelings about sheep. They might be a heart type. I don't know. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, if I wasn't a herding dog, I don't think I'd care this much about sheep. Like, my feelings are largely protective and like focused rather than like wanting to be a sheep or feeling like I am one. So having that idea that, like, okay, would I really care about this character if they weren't the love interest for who I am? Good questions to ask yourself. And I think really why I think most people, I would be surprised if somebody had absolutely zero paratypes, just because no identity is one thing. If you're some kind of animal species or therian, that animal exists in an ecosystem. It will have prey or predators. It will have things it eats. It will have things it interacts with in symbiotic ways or dangerous ways. Nothing just exists in a vacuum. The same is true for fictional characters. I'm sure there's some exception of a fictional story where literally only one character exists, but most fictional characters will have friends and enemies and rivals and partners and other people that are important to them. It makes sense that you would feel things about those people. Even if you're something abstract like a concept, you're musickin or voidkin or spacekin, even abstract concepts have relationships to other abstract concepts. So it makes sense to me that, like, if you have a certain identity, whatever that is, like, there would be other things related to it that are going to activate some feelings or be important to you or activate strong emotions, just because you can't be something without being connected to other things. And that is really it. So I will leave the rest of this time for questions and also go through my citation. All right, thank you, everybody. Right. Right, I will be scrolling a little bit through the back chat, but also it would probably be best to put questions in panel questions, and then I will see them for sure. All right. All right. Dog, 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 indeed. Imagine me engaging in a playback. Can it be a paratype if it's for a kin type you're unsure of questioning? I don't see why not. As Poppy put in the chat, generally part of the definition of paratype is that it's related to an existing type, but like while you're questioning, it makes sense that you're sort of figuring out what those relationships are. This isn't a question, but more so something I want to add to the conversation in case anyone has any questions related to it. I've had a couple of paratypes graduate into full-blown types before, which, yeah, that can happen. What's your opinion of paratypes of concepts? I'm a forest, but feel pretty connected to the feral person archetype for it. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, as I said towards the end there, anything is related to something else, whether that's an animal or a fictional character or a broad concept. Like, I've seen space concept people that are also feel related to, like, ocean concepts because big. So it makes it like, right, I am sure forests feel things about the animals and people in them. Also, I did not use a specific graphing program to make this. I used PowerPoint. All right. So Holly asked, so I'm questioning a Holly Leaf kin type, although I'm leaning towards kin type, I would still like your thoughts on this. So the reason I feel connected to Holly Leaf is because she has a story of hating this particular other character and wanting vengeance on him. This is related to my existing heart type of Virgil Sanders, who I feel connected to partially because he also has a character of hate he hates similarly. However, I feel connected to both of these narratives because of my own personal trauma surrounding a person who hurt me greatly who I hate. Could it count as paratype due to the Virgil heart type, or would the fact they both come from a separate source kind of indicate Holly Leaf could be its own type? Ultimately, I can't decide your kin types for you, nor would I want to. I think it's fine to know the origin of something and still have it be as a kin type. Some kin types are you have clear sources for, and that is okay. It ultimately depends on whether you feel like the Holly kin type would still be there without the Virgil heart type, and if so, it's not a paratype. Yeah. Okay, and then Otaku asks, vampires are a paratype of the flame haze, both basically don't exist in the world of the living and could live for centuries, though my affinity with vampires goes back to the Big Bad Beetleborg era. Is that still a paratype even though one came before the actual kin in this case? Again, if it feels associated to you, you can call it a paratype. Some of my interest in magical girls happened when I was like in preschool watching Sailor Moon, and the paladin identity came later, but now that I have the paladin identity, it's sort of slotted into the like, and this feels associated, so I call it a paratype, even though chronologically, me liking magical girls came first. Scurry Block asks, I noticed the double connection of sheep in the presentation. Does an overlapping association like that affect the paratype itself? In my experience, yes. I feel like sheep activating both kinds of feelings makes it a stronger paratype, and I feel bigger emotions about it, but that may not be a useful, that might not be a universal experience for everybody. Kari asks, do we have access to the presentation? It has been recorded / is being recorded and will be put up on the OtherCon YouTube channel, so if you missed it, it'll be there. Kiruka, so theoretically being a vampire, the Masquerade Kindred could be a paratype for me because it wouldn't be a thing if I wasn't a vampire in the first place. Sounds right. Does it also matter how long a shift in identity occurs? It would be something else if it's been a thing for a while. I don't think there's a time limit on paratypes. I have cared about sheep for years, but again, it ultimately comes down to your personal feelings about what feels like an identity and what feels like a, is it a planet or is it a moon? Do you think there's overlap between paratypes and constells? Probably. I'm not very familiar with constells, so I don't want to speak on it inaccurately. how intense slash important to your identity can a paratype be? Pretty important. I mean, I obviously they induce shifts. They can be mistaken for kin types. They can be related to or feel like heart types, which a lot of people dismiss how intense heart types can feel, but heart types can feel just as intense as kin types. Um, so, right, like, it's like if you were to ask a person, like, well, how important to you is your spouse? Like, pretty dang important. It doesn't mean you're the same person, but like that person could be very wrapped up in your life and your entire existence day to day. Do you need to get shifts of X for it to be a paratype, or does it need to invoke shifts of your kin paratype? You don't need to get shifts, you can. Invoking shifts is one of the ways a paratype might show up, but that's not the only way. It can just be like having strong feelings about it or personal association, or just reminding you of a kin type. All right. Um, Poppy asks, "Can I have a paratype of a paratype of a paratype?" Sure. There's moons. Like that's one of the reasons. Like the chart I showed with the different planets is a little oversimplified because I initially like one of the reasons I ended up consolidating fawn identity was the idea that like wait a minute, some of my associate I initially thought of goats as like a paratype of a paratype where it went like dog, sheep, goat, centaur, but I was like that goes a little too far. But I think there's a fawn identity in there somewhere. But I mean, much like planetary bodies, moons can have moons. Moons can have moons. Like, it's right, like what we are talking about webs of relationships. So even if you were to just draw out a food chain, wolf is associated with deer, is associated with grass or rabbit or anything else. In your experience, can paratypes change or fade over time? I've experienced literal kin types just going away suddenly or changing into something else. So I guess that could happen with paratypes too. I imagine it could. I haven't had that experience myself, but there is not a prescriptive element to experiences. If you experience something, it has happened, and then therefore it is real. All right. This was only a half-hour panel, and I don't know how far we can get into questions without bumping into anybody, but being plural can make this fairly complicated, says Foxtail Pip. Could you say that associations a headmate has that can make them more likely to front could be considered paratypes? Like I say, a dog headmate who can come to front whenever the body reads some things about nice. It wouldn't exist as an association without the dog core, but it's still important. That sounds related to me, but not being for myself to speak to like applying things to plural terms or whether that would be better served by different language. Hey, this person is a dog and they show up when things around nights show up sounds like a paratype to me, but again, I don't want to overstep lines not being plural myself. Right. And I will highlight House of Chimeras as someone who is musing on paratypes because of plurality or being part of a system, so hopefully that discussion can continue naturally and develop. Right, just so that we're not filling dead air, I'm gonna stop streaming for now, and I think we can stop the recording, but I hope the discussion continues in panel questions and in the chat. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. And I hope this was helpful.